Good morning. My name is Sheila Williams, and I am uh, speaking today on parental alienation and how it impacts custody and divorce matters. I've been a practicing attorney for 43 years. I've done minors counsel work for probably close to 20, 25 years. And I just wanted to remind you guys of a story of why I do this. And it was I was appointed in a case in which the dad knew me through sources that he had and insisted that Commissioner Michael McCoy appoint me as minors counsel. And while I was reluctant to do so, I agreed, and dad was ordered to pay my fees. At some point in time, as happens in these cases, one parent or the other understands where this is going, and it wasn't going in his favor, so he chose not to pay me. So I went to court on my report on that particular case, and Commissioner McCoy said, "Ms. Williams, I will excuse you from this case since Dad won't pay you." I said, "No, no, no, quite the contrary. I will do minors cases for free for the rest of my legal career. I do not charge for my service because I don't want one parent to think that money drives me, because it doesn't. I do this out of my love for the law and helping families get through difficult issues." So that's kind of my journey into minors counsel work, and I totally enjoy it. Presently, I'm a family law mediator with Judge Wells, but I still do my minors counsel cases whenever either Judge Cho or Commissioner Reed contacts me. And I was a few years ago, I was on vacation and got an email from the clerk saying Commissioner Reed had a case for me. Carol Adams was on one side, I forget who was on the other. I gladly accepted, made my call from overseas, and ultimately worked with that family for a number of years. And I find this whole concept of parental alienation to be very interesting. There's two sides to every story, and we all understand that. I go back historically to, and you guys might know the name Judith Wallerstein. In the 80s, she decided to do a longitudinal study on the effects of children who were in high conflict divorces. And she ultimately, with one of her colleagues, presented an amicus brief to the California Supreme Court on major cases involving what now we discuss as parental alienation, but back then it was called alignment. And she talked about the outcomes. And I found it very interesting because here's what the research said after following these children for 15, 20 years. That was her study. She followed these kids all these years and came to the following conclusions: that the majority of these children are damaged. They're either high school dropouts, teen pregnancies, drugs, alcohol, very disturbed lives. And what she concluded is that dynamic between those parents creates that monster of a kid in most cases. I mean, there were kids who had good outcomes, but most of them were not. So that was kind of the start of this parental alienation concept. And we all know in family law cases there are always going to be complicated custody issues. Not because they are complicated, but because of the parents. And when I do these cases, I spend a lot of time with both parents. I spend time with my kids. I have visits with them. I bring them to my home and we have barbecues and pool parties. I take them out to lunch. I meet with the whole families together just to look at the dynamic. And it's obvious in most of the cases where that issue lies. And it's usually with one parent. That's not to say the other parent is blameless, but there's one parent who is generally the perpetrator of this behavior. A psychologist named Richard Gardner back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, came up with this concept. Up to that point, it had not been used. They used terms like alienation and alignment, but he actually did a research study. And by the way, over the years, most people have discredited Mr. Gardner's theories about parental alienation. And here's why they do. The research that he conducted was based solely on his interpretation of the data gathered from his clinical practice. And so he was criticized by many psychologists in the field because he took very drastic approaches and remedies to how to solve these problems. And one of those solutions was take the child from the alienating parent for a 90-day period approximately, eliminate any contact whatsoever, and let's see what happens to that child. Whether or not that child will now function better with the alienating parent out of the picture. And of course, some judges have done that. Lawyers have recommended it. I have in certain cases. Because there is no one size fits all conclusion to these problems. Every case is different. And after one of my cases, in 2 years of minors counsel work, I was of the opinion that the dad should walk away. And while that was the hardest decision that I made in that case, and I explained to the commissioner why, the situation was out of control. Every time these children would spend time with their dad, there would be more allegations raised every single time. And mom kept going back to court, trying to get restraining orders and changing custody. And it never stopped for 2 years. And I finally said to the dad, a nice guy, by the way, I don't know if you can live this way, but I've been on this case for 2 years. And I have not seen any changes in these kids. I met with the kids individually with dad, and it was almost like he was a stranger to them. The youngest was 6 years old. The kid I thought was savable. The teenage girls were 14 and 17, and they had zero ability to want to have a relationship with their dad. They went on the visits. And so over time, as I made recommendations in that 2-year period, one of the issues was the exchanges. They weren't happening as ordered by the court. So I thought, I think I have a good solution. Dad, you pick up the kids from school on Fridays. Mom doesn't even have to be involved. And then you take them for the weekend. And what happened? Mom did not take the kids to school on Friday. Or Monday, in case he went back on Monday to go get the kids. I made recommendations for 50-50. And while the kids did see their dad periodically, it was just a challenge to get those kids to have a relationship with their dad. So being frustrated, and I'm not one to give up easily, I finally made a recommendation to the court, and I said, I don't want to make this recommendation, but I don't think I have any choice. Criminal charges had been levied against dad. Nothing ever stuck. And mom was intent upon making sure those kids had no relationship with their father. So my recommendation was, Dad, I talked to him first, not his lawyer. I said, Dad, I've been through this journey with you for 2 years. Is this the way you want to have your life every other weekend? And in a teary communication with him, he didn't want to walk away, but he knew that it wasn't going to ever change. So I felt that while that was probably the right choice, those kids definitely need their dad. And mom had remarried and, of course, made all kinds of comments about the dad to the kids, and it was just a sad situation. My clients actually showed up at the hearing, and when I told them that dad was walking away, you could have sworn it was Christmas. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. These kids were ecstatic. Mom was not asked by me, the attorney for the kids, to bring them to court. She brought them anyway. So the judge granted the request that I made and my recommendation. And I said at the same time, it's not fair that dad, who has zero timeshare, should pay substantial child support. And the commissioner agreed. And while we know there are cases that say child support is based upon the percentage of time, dad had zero. And support would have gone through the roof. And the commissioner agreed. Because I didn't feel that was fair for mom to not only take advantage of that situation, but to also materially benefit by a doubling of child support, because we know what happens between, zero timeshare and 50% timeshare. So those are the kinds of challenges, but it's rampant in family law cases. And I gave you guys 3 articles, but one of them says that we see this concept, and you can call it parental alienation or you can call it alignment, but it's rampant in about 15 or 20% of the custody cases. The other issues are solvable. Mom and dad break up. Mom has always been the primary caregiver. Dad now wants to exert his rights, which he legally has under the law. And mom will start to say bad things about dad to the kids. When I have represented clients, not kids, I have always made it my practice to counsel my clients on that kind of behavior. I will get off a case if I have a client who does that. I'm not going to represent them. And I think that we as lawyers have an obligation when we represent those clients to tell them that. In one of my recent cases, I met with the kids and the mom. Mom was and is the alienating parent, no question. But it was a subtle alienation. And here's the good news and bad news, and it's this. When our kids, our clients, are with their parents, mom and dad, we don't know what's going on. We only know when we observe them. But I also believe that when you look at the result, which is, I don't want to be with this parent, then there's something going on in that household. Definitely. So in one of my recent cases, I decided to go to Dad's house to observe this relationship, spend the afternoon. And so I said to Dad, I'll come by the house at 11. I already told Mom to have the kids ready. I was taking them out to lunch. And I got there and kids were not ready to go. Dad had picked them up on Friday, and he said on Friday, take your showers. Sheila's coming tomorrow for lunch, and they refused. And I got to the house, and they were in their rooms refusing to come out. And you know, I tell people all the time, when I was raised as a kid, my mother never yelled at us. She never hit us. She gave you the look. And when you got the look, you knew what to do. Stop. So I said to the kids, both sitting there, uninterested, you have 30 minutes to take a shower, and we're leaving. And I'm going to go outside, and I'll see you at 11:30. And at 11:31, they both come out of the apartment, hair wet, obviously had taken showers, wouldn't listen to Dad. They listened to me on that issue. We get to lunch, and they were just, I don't want to eat. I said, fine, you can not eat. That's okay. We sat at a table for almost 2 hours, and those kids never acknowledged Dad, never talked to him, never looked at him, nothing. It was one of the most uncomfortable visits that I've ever had, but I needed to see this. And I would think that my clients would act a little better with me there, knowing that I can say something to a judge. And they didn't. So as we left lunch, they walked past us fast, out of our ability to see them. And so I was yelling out for the kids, and they totally ignored me. Whether they didn't hear me or ignored me, I don't know which one it was, but they didn't stop. And they, by the time we got to the car, they were standing at the car, and I said to the boy, did you hear me? I was asking you to stop because I couldn't see you. It was the day of the Palm Springs Tour de Palm Springs bicycle race, and there were lots of people downtown. And I was concerned about their safety. So when I got to the car, when I said to the kids, didn't you hear me? The boy yelled out, you need to walk faster. And I thought, really? Who talks to an adult like that? I have seen my parental alienation cases, alignment cases, in extreme situations. Most of my cases are extreme. Extreme. And so after the final orders were made, Dad wanted to walk away. His therapist did not want him to. I didn't want him to. And he was just done. Men don't always emote, and this was a very emotional dad. In tears. What do I do? I ask them what I can do to make their visit happier, and they don't suggest anything. And if they do, nobody's having a good time. And this guy was stressed every single visit. And in between visits, knowing that on Wednesdays he was going to have this visit with one of the kids. I separated them out on Wednesdays. They were together on weekends. And I wanted Dad to have a 3 or 4 hour period with each kid on a Wednesday just to kind of bond with that child. And while it worked a little bit, it really didn't work at all. And I found out that the ringleader was the boy, the younger of the 2 kids. So when the commissioner made her orders, keeping Dad in the kids' lives, by the way, we're going to start every other weekend come March. And then come June, we're going to do every other week. Deal with it, Mom. dad. So, of course, I called the kids, had mom bring them over. And at first, my thought was I'll just meet with the kids and talk to them to tell them, because I said to the court and counsel, I want to tell my clients what the new orders are. They had about 4 weeks before the visits would start. Dad had stopped visiting for a while. And then I thought, you know what? It's going to be more effective if I include mom. So, mom, you get to come and you get to sit here too. And you get to tell your kids in front of me that they're going to go see their dad and they're going to have a good time. I know it was hard for her to do it, but she wasn't one of those, some of the moms are just aggressive and in your face. She was just the opposite. Appears to be cooperating, appears to want it to happen. But I needed the kids to hear their mom say, it's okay. Go have a good time. I haven't talked to dad. That visit was last week. Um, I didn't hear anything, so I assume everything went okay. I don't know. But the kids had to be with mom. Mom is the alienating parent, no question. And when I have these cases, I call it the way I see it. That's why I don't take fees. I don't care what they think about me. I care about those kids and having a healthy relationship with both of their parents. So in June, these kids are going to be week on, week off with dad. And they will kick and scream and yell. And I said, and here's the deal. The judge told me, I'm talking to my kids in front of the mom who was at court, and I said, so the judge told me that if, Miss Williams, if they're having problems, then you know what? You call my clerk and bring those kids down here. I'll talk to them. And I told him that. I said, so we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way, because I will call the judge tomorrow and I will schedule a meeting next week, and she'll pull you in chambers and have a conversation with you and tell you what I'm telling you right now. Or you can just go have your visits. That's the way it's going to be. And, many of these cases, the kids can't identify, and this is where the problem is and why I think it's the parent involved. The kid can't identify a, a situation that would cause that alignment. For example, if you've got a bad father who is physically abusive, who is sexually abusive, right? You can understand why that kid doesn't want to be with him. I get it. But in most of my cases, I find there are no valid reasons. Why? Because the alienating parent is at home making comments about dad doesn't support you, dad doesn't love you, dad walked away from you, and they believe it because they want to align with the parent in that case. That's not to say that men are not alienating parents. It happens. It's, in my views, in the cases that I've had, it's the minority position. Most of the alienating parents are the moms. And mostly it's because they have issues about why a relationship didn't work. It's your fault. I was a stay-at-home mom. I raised these kids, and that's not uncommon. When I was a kid growing up, my dad worked, my mom stayed home. We spent more time with mom than my dad. But every week, my father, who had a pickup truck, would take all the neighborhood kids in his pickup truck to the nearest ice cream place, like once a week. So while he worked and had to support the family, he had involvement. And many of the families today, we see that that doesn't happen very much. When dads are working full-time, trying to earn a living, to pay all the expenses, to pay for private schools, they're not around. And when they are around, they're exhausted. Dave, you're a father. You work all day, and it's hard to go home and let's go do something fun because you're tired. You want to just relax, and it's hard. And parents need to understand, and I tell that to the dads and to the parents that I represent, you need to have some quality time with your kids. Parents sometimes have their date nights. Have a date night with your kid. Take them out. Leave mom at home. Let her, she doesn't have to cook. Let's go to have pizza and spend time. So that damage happens well before separation. It just gets emphasized in the divorce. And then you have people who understand that timeshare and child support have a major, major, major position in how we manage these cases. And clients will say to me, well, how much is the child support? Well, if he's got 20%, it's this, but if he's got 50%, it's that. Okay, well, I'd like to go for the 10%. How's that? How much do I get for that? It's not about child support, but they make it that way. And it's a form of punishment. It's a form of people who have not emotionally developed, in my opinion. Because people who are emotionally developed will support the growth of their kids. I've given you guys 3 articles that you can have and read on your own. But there's some very good points that I saw that I wanted to emphasize in my talk today. And by the way, the term parental alienation syndrome, PAS, is not recognized by the DSM. It is not listed as a diagnosable illness by the American Psychological Association, American Medical Association, World Health Organization. Nobody recognizes that term. But we know that there are issues, and we know that it is mostly shown as we go through very highly contested divorce cases. So forget the kids for a while. We're fighting about the house, we're fighting about the business, we're fighting about money. And imploded into that situation is moms, and I'm just going to use mom as an example, and of course moms are not always the alienating parent, but I'm going to use a mom in this case. And then she's going to use all of those things financially to undermine dad. He's not paying support. Why should you have a conversation with your child about that? In one of my recent cases, a collateral source who was recommended by both parents, so I give a lot of credibility to that collateral source, right? If it's your mother, she's going to say nice things. If it's your sister, she's going to say nice things. You find one person who both people acknowledge as a collateral source. And here's what she told. There was a psychological evaluation. Here's what she said. An example. Mom is the problem. I am close to both parents, and one day mom goes to the market, takes the kids with her to buy groceries, and she pulls out a bag of pennies and change. Dad doesn't give me money, so this is how I get to pay for my groceries. What do you think that does to kids? When I read that, I thought, I already knew the answer. That just underlined it, punctuated it, and made me absolutely clear. How could you do a thing like that to your child? In one of the articles that I gave you, which is entitled What is Parental Alienation Syndrome, they talk about, and Gardner, who was the beginning of this, when he talks about PAS, he identified 8 symptoms that he saw. Number 1, the child constantly and unfairly criticizes the alienated parent, sometimes called a campaign of degradation. Criticizes the alienating parent. You're not around. You don't do things. You don't support mom. You don't support us. You don't love us. Number 2, the child doesn't have any strong evidence, specific examples, or justifications for the criticism. And that's key. I see that in many cases. Why don't you like your dad? What's wrong? He talks too loud. He's tall. Nothing that has any substance. Number 3, the child's feelings about the alienating parents aren't mixed. They're all negative, with no redeeming qualities. Who doesn't have at least one redeeming quality? They can't think of any. And I remember meeting with Dad, and I said, can you tell me some stuff you guys used to do when you guys were still in an intact marriage that you did with your son? And he says, yeah, I work on computers, and I was teaching him how to build a computer, and we had all this fun, and we had a great time. And so when I asked the kid about it, he goes, I don't remember that. I don't think we never did that. I think, really? Not one positive comment these kids have. Number 4, the child claims the criticisms are all their own conclusions and based upon their own independent thinking. The child claims the criticisms are all their own conclusions. Well, if you don't have a basis in fact to support your conclusions, then really? What's mom telling you? What are you exposed to? What happens in your household? I've always wondered and thought, for us to be effective in this business, I need to put a microphone in your house. I need to hear I need to have a camera going. I need to see what's happening because I know it's happening. How else can you justify this behavior? Number 5, the child has unwavering support for the alienator. So watch my kids. Here's mom and the 2 kids in the room, and they're all on my love seat together. And dad comes in, and the kids are on the love seat, and dad is on the sofa on the other side of the room. They don't want to be close. But they'll sit. My love seat only fits 2 people. I got 2 kids and the mama sitting on the love seat. That's where they want to be. So sometimes it's not only the words that people speak, the language we see in their declarations, but watching them physically, watching them interact with each other. It tells you a lot about people. Do they look at each other? Do they talk to each other? Do the kids look to mom for the prompts and what to say? And because I have a good relationship with both parents, I basically put mom on the spot and I said, you know what, this is going to happen. And you need to tell my clients right now, that they won't do this. Because if you tell them that, like your kid says, I'm not going to school. Okay, I don't think so. You're going to go visit your dad, and I made sure that she was involved. And she was a little reluctant to say it, but I made her say it to the kids so they know it's okay with her. Because kids don't think that it is. They think that they have a good time with dad. Now their allegiance to mom is faltering, and that's not a true statement. So I wanted her to do that. We probably spent 2 hours together that Saturday morning. Tell them again. Here's the date when you're starting. Here's what's going to happen. And by the way, here are the consequences, kids, to your behavior. So I'm going to tell you the consequences. I'm going to tell your parents the consequences. I'm going to tell their lawyers the consequences. And I'm going to tell your therapist the consequences. So here's what's going to happen. You act up. I'm taking your devices. Really. You know how kids are attached to devices today. Take away something that they love. And by the way, the amount of time that I take it away will be based upon your reaction to the situation. So if you want to be difficult all weekend, no devices at all. If you get it in the first 5 minutes, Dad, give it back to him. And by the way, when you're at a meal with your father, you will not have your device with you. It stays at home. We do that as adults. I was at dinner the other night, and people sit there and they're talking on their phones, ignoring each other. Nobody's really having a conversation. No cell phones, no devices at dinner or any meal. You will sit and you will have a conversation. Number 6, the child doesn't feel guilty about mistreating or hating the alienated parent. Wow, that's deep. There is no guilt at all. They just feel like it's a normal way to be. And while I think it's important for me to get involved in these cases early on, which I did in this particular case that I'm speaking of, didn't help. When that alienating behavior has been going on for years, it's really hard for us as the minors counsel to intervene and change the dynamic of a 3 or 4 year dysfunctional situation. And so one of the reasons that I continue to do this work is that there aren't that many of us here in the Coachella Valley who do this. And if you don't get in right away, the likelihood of good outcomes is slim to none. Number 7. The child uses terms and phrases that seem borrowed from adult language when referring to situations that never happened or happened before the child's memory. Sometimes you hear kids talking and they say, wow, it's like 12 years old, talks like a 24-year-old. I mean, the language they use. Well, we know what they were exposed to in school. And this isn't language that's child-specific. It is an adult having an influence. And the last of the syndrome issues is symptoms, that is, the child's feeling of hatred toward the alienating parent expand to include other family members related to that parent. So let's go see Grandma. I don't think so. Let's go see your Aunt Shirley. I don't think so. So it extends past the parent itself. It goes into Dad's contacts, Dad's friends. If Dad is dating, it goes into that relationship. The friends that the kids knew. And they talk about, in this one article, signs that alienation may be taking place. They give you a few things. An alienator might divulge unnecessary relational details. You tell your kids about the divorce. You tell your kids that Dad had an affair, and that's why we're not together. Kids don't need to know that stuff. An alienator may prevent a child from seeing or talking to the other parent. We see that all the time. I'm blocking your number. You're not talking to your dad. An alienator may insist the child's personal items all be kept at the alienator's house. You can't take your stuff to your dad's house. Well, it's their stuff. If they want to take their toys and their certain favorite clothes they have, why not? Nope, everything stays here. And if you want that stuff, then Dad's going to have to go buy it for you. An alienator may plan tempting activities during the other parent's custodial time. I've seen that. One of my kids liked to run I've run marathons, and so we chatted about running one day. And so Dad said, "Oh, I'll find a race, local race in town, 5K on a Saturday." And he takes the kids, and guess who shows up? Mama. Really? Now, under normal circumstances, that would probably not be problematic, okay? But in this situation, it speaks volumes of Mom's behavior. And I'm sure they've been talking before that event, so they know she's coming. Wow. Alienators tend to bend or break custody guidelines. Whenever we make these recommendations, they become court orders, so people have it in writing. They know the start time, where the exchanges are. And so I finally said, in this case, we're going to have a normal situation when exchanges happen. The receiving parent picks up at the other parent's house curbside. We're not going to the gas station, and we're not going down to Denny's, and we're not going to Starbucks. Go to the house. Sit in your car. Kids come out. Mom, you see them go out. Dad, you see them come in. The kids have to see a normal situation between them, their parents, because otherwise they will continue to have that behavior, which will never end. And many times it doesn't. And especially when the kids are older. You get the 12, 13, 14-year-olds. It's difficult. One of my cases many years ago, where the husband dad wanted to get me off the case, the child wanted to be with her dad. And I didn't think that was in her best interest, and I told her that. So they went to mediation, and CCRC recommended the child live with her father. The child's therapist recommended that the child live with her father. Minors counsel said no. So I'm in front of McCoy, commissioner at that time, years ago. And of course, if you're going to have that conclusion against other professionals, you better have some backup. I gave him 7 reasons why I was making that recommendation, and he followed it. A year later, the kid, who was like 15 at the time, contacts me, and she says, "Thank you. Dad turned out to be a piece of work, but he would always have this way that he would try and get his daughter to want to be with him. He created allegations of inappropriate sexual contact between stepfather and my teenage client." McCoy was on the case. He took custody away from Mom. Mom had supervised visits. I met with them within a week or two, and I said to the kid privately, show me what your stepfather did to you." You know what he did? He gave her a back rub. And it reminded me of when I was a kid growing up. One of the things that I loved the most, I was probably 7 or 8. My dad would come home and he would scratch our backs. You ever had, my dad would like give us a back rub and scratch our backs, you know? And it was like, cool, I love that stuff. And that was the fact that Dad turned into sexual abuse. And of course, most judges are going to respond because we want to default and do the right thing. But ultimately, that was not the case. And Mom got custody back of the kid. And Dad was very upset with me. How dare you? How dare you? She would say to me, my client, "I'm a teenager. Don't I get to decide?" And that's the language that I was telling you about. Where did they learn that? Oh, what about Family Code 3247 or whatever it is? I mean, when a kid talks to me like that, I'm going, hold on. Who have you been talking to? Oh, Dad. Okay. Now, when you turn to 12, you can your opinion counts, and they got to do what you want to do. And I said, I don't think so. And she fought with me. I mean, I don't usually fight with my clients, but I said, this is not a good situation. I cleared the stepdad. We had many visits. Mom was a wonderful mom. Everything was great. But ultimately, and Dad lived out of the area. So he was literally going to, and I knew if custody had gone to him, he would have done everything in his powers to block contact with the mom. Who had her own issues, by the way. None of these people are issue free. I mean, that's the challenge of our business. Everybody's got an issue. Hi, Carol. Come on in. Everybody has an issue. None of us are perfect. And so, now that Ms. Bear has arrived, good morning.
Good morning to you.
I wanted to say one of the most helpful pieces in this whole process is people like Carol Bear.
Oh my goodness.
Keep people like Kim Phillips, people who are the reunification therapists, people who involve themselves. Dr. Sheeran does custody evaluations. And in the case that I spoke of earlier with the two kids, while Dr. Sheeran did a custody evaluation, I didn't really learn anything new in terms of the ultimate conclusion, but I understood some of the background because they want to talk to you. Tell me about you growing up, and what life was like when you were with your parents. And so all of those things give you some insight into the parents' future behaviors. And it's people like Carol who work tirelessly. She's on speed dial. I'll call her up. I had a case, it was a Sunday, and I had met Mom the week before and at her home. And I noticed that when I asked her for me to speak privately to the kids, I wanted to go out in the backyard to be out of her earshot and being able to hear us. And she refused. She went into her bedroom. And so the following 2 or 3 days, it was my visit with the boys at their dad's house, and he lived in a different city. So I met the boys, and one of the twins came to me out of the blue and said, "Sheila, can I speak to you?" "Sure." And he told me of an incident where he got in trouble with his mom. And he ran into his bedroom, hid under the bed. She grabbed a broom and started poking him with the broom under the bed. 14-year-old kid. I decided right then and there, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had both lawyers' cell numbers, and I called them up and I said, "They ain't going back to Mom today, so tell Mom not to come down because they're not going." And the argument on the one side was, well, there's been all these CPS reports and nobody's ever done anything, so they're making it up. The other side of it is, these kids were afraid. They never felt they had the support because they knew at the end of the day, they were going to be with Mom. And if you rat Mom out, guess what? What are those outcomes going to look like? So what do? Call Carol Bayer. "Hey, Carol, can you see these kids?" "Sure, how about Tuesday?" "Fine. You're not going back to your mom until I iron this thing out." These boys were so wonderful kids who had done not so well in school. They were in special education, barely getting passing grades. So then they go to Dad's house. And he didn't see Mom. They didn't see Mom for a number of weeks, not because I was trying to do a Gardner thing, but because I had to get to the bottom line of this. If there's all these reports and CPS has done nothing, then what's the credibility here? So after conferring with Carol and meeting with the kids and with the mom and the dad, I was convinced that there was physical abuse in that household. I was convinced. So finally, when it was time for the boys to see the mom, I set a meeting at my house, which I do all the time. I had Dad bring the kids. He left. I didn't want him involved. I spent an hour with my 3 boys talking to them about the fact that Mama was coming over in an hour. I just want y'all to be ready. And by the way, I will be here with you the whole time. She will not touch you. She will say nothing bad to you. So just chill out. And I said, by the way, we're going to have lunch. And so they told me what they wanted. So I went to the market. So I had the 3 boys in the kitchen with me, and we were cooking. They wanted chicken parmesan, so we made chicken parmesan and made the pasta, and everybody was helping out. And so Mom shows up, and it was like she was a stranger to them. She came to the front door, not having seen the boys for maybe 6-8 weeks. And they were just distant to her. They wanted nothing to do with her. And I said, "Boys, you're safe." When they walked into my office, they had been average students. C's, one of the twins had some real anger issues. And so they walked into my house that day. Dad brought them over. Report cards. Youngest one, student of the month. Nice, buddy. Other kid, all A's, 1B. Cool. Other kid, all B's, 1A. Slick. You guys rock. They thrived with their father. And so Mom had many visits with me, and I made it absolutely clear that the kids were not going to live with her full time. Ever again. You don't get to touch kids and do the things that you did. And she was a very intelligent woman, by the way. And she did everything humanly possible to try and convince me otherwise. And as I said, I don't do this for money, so I don't think so. Once those kids told me what happened and told identical stories to Carol and other professionals, and we didn't have to do a 7:30 evaluation in that case. Ultimately, my recommendations controlled. They lived with Dad, and I felt they should have a contact with their mom. So every other weekend, I said, "But here's the deal. Here's my cell phone number. If anything happens, put me on speed dial, call me. I'll be at that house in 15 minutes. So they didn't want to go, but they did. And ultimately, mom's visits, they had a Wednesday visit. And on Wednesdays, because of the distance between the parents, it was a problem. And the kids were now in junior high school and involved in activities. So I decided and recommended to eliminate a Wednesday visit and have the kids go back to school with mom on Monday. And so when the boys asked me about my recommendations, I said, and the youngest one is a math kid. He's like 12. I said, so in a 30-day period, and you spend every other weekend with your dad from Friday to Sunday, how many nights do you spend with your mama every month? 26. How many with dad? 4. Okay, now that you're living with your dad, how many nights do you spend with your dad every month? 26. How many do you spend with your mom? 4. I said, so here's the deal. She's still your mama, and you're going to have a relationship with her, but it's not going to be the way it was. These kids they thrive. They call me, they email me, they send text messages. When I went to Paris last summer, I brought us all matching I Love Paris t-shirts and took them to their house. And, just great kids. And that turned out to be a very good outcome. Mom finally backed off, and she knows that my opinion is not going to change. No matter what she does, she's already damaged those kids. And there's probably some damage on weekends, but I can't eliminate it all. And they need their mom, and she needs to understand. And she's got a son by another relationship, and that dad is absent. So she's got full control there. So she doesn't ever see that there are consequences to her behavior because nobody ever checked her on it. And these kids are just incredible kids. I mean, I have like about 8, 10 kids, and I just love my kids. And periodically, I'll just send them a text. They won't text their mother. They don't want nothing to do with her. The other case where the kids don't want to be with their dad, they don't text him. They don't text they don't want to even have a communication with me. My little other teenage kids, they want nothing to do with me. And one day they came into my office and I said, oh, how do you feel today? Okay. Are you going to talk to us about why we don't want to spend time with dad? I said, no, I'm not going to talk about it. I beat you up enough. I accept your opinions. We're not going to talk about that. And we didn't. And they felt totally relieved. But at the end of the day, they have to address this. Because what kind of parents are they going to be? What kind of adults are they going to be? Because we have these psychological dramas in our lives that impact us all. None of us are perfect. However, that intervention, and I've not always felt strongly about reunification and long-term therapy, but every case is different. And I believe that the professionals that I work with are doing an incredible job in allowing both parents to understand their behaviors and to make changes, whether they want to or not. And that threat always exists that we can take these kids away from you. I mean, that it's not a foregone conclusion if these behaviors continue. But I wanted to give these kids, the ability to make their own choice. So are you going to have a healthy relationship with your father? You're going to talk to him? You're going to be respectful. They will talk to him like he was a stranger. I have never seen anything like that in this last case in my life. How dare you talk to an adult the way you do? My mother would roll over in her grave if we said anything like that. I mean, you just don't do that. They're respectful of teachers. I said to the kids, I said, so if you're at school and you do some bad behavior, what's the consequences? Because I wanted them to understand there are consequences to their behavior. Oh, well, they'll school have rules on things that they could do to kids. We'll put you in a room and you sit there for all day or whatever they do. And they understood those consequences. And I wanted them to understand the consequences of not having a relationship with their father. We will take your phone away. Maybe you'll have to go talk to the judge. I think I'm going to pick y'all up from school, and we're going down to the end of your courthouse. I'm going to take you up to the courtroom, and the judge is going to pull you in the back, and she's going to talk to you. You want to do that? You want to go down to court? They didn't seem to want to do that one. So I'll follow up with Dad this weekend and see how that visit went. Any questions? Okay.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to add, I had a really current case, and it was very interesting. Mom's current spouse
Carol
was apparently molesting an adult child when she was younger, and one of the 2 girls still in mom's home with husband. That was an out-of-county case, so there was no real information with CPS here. there was a third child in the family, a boy who's 10, and the girls were immediately removed from mother's house. There were two girls, older, and she ordered that the 10-year-old go with dad also when she removed the two girls, which was about maybe 6 weeks ago, maybe 8 weeks ago. And I had all the kids in my office a number of times. One time with Mom at the beginning of the case, and he sat in this chair and she sat next to him, and you know, I ask always, tell me your feelings about Mom, tell me your feelings about Dad, and I let them talk to me first, and then I want to see how they act when they've got a parent in here.
Mm-hmm.
So Mom came in and we were talking about why he didn't want to go to Dad's house. And he really didn't have any ideas, but he was all buried in the chair, looking down, squiggling, you know, squirming around, kind of sad. And he said, I just don't want to go to my dad's. And Mom reached over and patted him and smiled really big, you know, like congratulating him. And you could tell she was very happy that he said that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course that went into my first Minors Council report before he was ordered to go with Dad. So he didn't ever go with Dad despite the court order.
Hmm.
So we were in court within the last couple of weeks, and I had again met with him. I had gone to see him at Dad's house when he did go for one visit. He went there to be there when I was coming. Only time he went there in the last 2 months, just to be there so I could observe him at Dad's house. Mom never let me come to her house. She didn't want me there.
Mm-hmm.
So I met with her and the child in my office. I met with her and the girls in my office. I met with, you know, everybody here and there, all over the place. But anyway, we were in court, like I said, in the last couple of weeks, and the judge again ordered that this child would go with Dad because there was an order in place that none of the kids are to be left alone with Mom's husband, current husband.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know how the child was going to take it, the son was going to take it. Dad was ordered to pick the child up from Mom the day of court, and when I knew that, I called and I had Dad, bring the child to my office that day. And I was very surprised. I was explaining why the court was sending him to live with Dad, and one of the things was, even that day in court, Mother said, my kids have never been left alone with my husband, never, ever, ever. And I said to the child, one of the reasons that this is happening is because people are concerned that you've been left with, you know, Mom's husband. She says that you haven't. His eyebrows shot up and he went like, huh?
Wow.
Because he had been left with husband every day.
Yep.
While Mom was at work. He acknowledged that. And when he and Dad were leaving my office that day, you know, I brought Dad and I brought Child in to talk about what are you going to like at Dad's house now? What kind of fun are you going to have when you go there? He said, and the child said, we're going to play video games together. We've got stuff going already. And all they had been together was between pickup at Mom's house and coming to my office.
Wow.
So maybe they'd been together for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
When that child left my office with his dad, he was like, come on, Dad, let's go, let's go, let's go. It was a shock to even me how he changed from the several times I'd seen him during the case when he had been living with Mom, and he had admitted to me he didn't want to go to Dad's because he knew it would make Mom sad. There was more to it, I found out on the very last day when he skipped out of here with his dad.
Yep.
I was surprised.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done these cases for 20 years too. So sometimes the alienation is overpowering and kids are
Yep.
controlled to the point that they don't speak up. And sometimes we have to recommend that the court make a certain order, even though I wasn't sure exactly why, but I knew a
Yes.
change had to be made. And the court followed through with that. And she was quite down on Mother that she hadn't sent the son to live when the girls left to go with Dad. She was quite down on Mother that Mother hadn't sent the son too. And Mom said, well, I've told him he has to go, but he refuses. And he was 10. And then we learned in the very end, he hadn't refused. He'd been feeling like he better not leave. And that's another, I mean, all of us here have had cases of alienation probably in our, history of minors counsel and history of therapy. But they sometimes end up very, very surprising.
They do. One of the pieces in one of the articles that I handed you said something that I thought was very interesting, because in one of my cases, we were focusing on how we get the kids and dad to visit. What was absent, because that was such a challenge, was the mom. Okay? Then we started focusing on the mom. So after reading the 7:30 evaluation, I had my opinions of her, but I'm certainly not a therapist, but I've worked in this field for a long time. Here's what they say. Parents who are the alienating parents are either narcissistic or emotionally unstable. And in that case, in my opinion, mom is emotionally unstable. She's not narcissistic. She doesn't come across that way at all. She doesn't get in your face and say things, but she's not emotionally stable. Yes?
A couple of years ago, actually during COVID, there was a training through AFCC. I think everybody knows what that is,
Yes,
right?
yes.
We're all probably members. And Diana and I both did it, not together, but online. And it was about a 6-week program, and it was talking about reunification and how difficult it is. And it talked about the two parents, the favored parent is obviously at that point, I think we all know this is the one that the children want to stay with. And there's the other parent, they didn't say the unfavored parent, but that was implied. And the point of it all, they had lots of vignettes, they had, it was the well-known people in AFCC, Leslie Droys and others. And they talked about how there has to be a buy-in at some point from the favored parent. And that is probably the hardest job, I'm sure, for you folks as attorneys and minors counsel. It's the toughest job, I think, for us as therapists, and it's probably the thing that will get us some bad reviews on Yelp when we don't deserve them, but we have to be tough. But it's also why so many therapists do not want to touch anything court-related, because they're fearful. And these parents can be exceedingly difficult, no matter how reasonable you are that children need both their parents in their lives. They will come up with a laundry list of why not, and why they shouldn't be with that terrible parent, from, dad doesn't know how to take care of an infant. Then it ramps up to, well, my children come back with rashes.
Yes.
Then it ramps up to, well, I think he may have touched and this has happened to all of us, touched our daughter or touched our son inappropriately. And it ramps up until the parent, and I think we all have a couple of these same cases, that dad, if it's the dad in this situation, almost wants to give up. It's like, I can't go through this anymore. And that's the one I think that you were referencing earlier.
Yep.
By the way, we did have a meeting.
Good.
And not so much better, but getting there.
Good. Good.
But that's what's so tough. And when you even explain this to the quote favored parent, whether it's the dad or the mom, they will tell you why it's still not okay. But finally, and after maybe 4 to 6 weeks of working with them and helping the kids to feel safe, you can get them to open up. It's a wonderful training. I think it was, I forget which university they used to present it. I can't recall right now, but it was an excellent training that was very, very useful.
Got it. 2 final points before I end. We all hear of sexual allegations, and in one of my cases, there was an allegation that dad had inappropriate sexual contact with the son. So as I'm reading the reports and talking to the dad and talking to the kid, I actually learned something in this case. Okay, so what dad was doing, the kid was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and so dad, when the boy was with dad, he would take him into the bathroom. As men urinate, they stand up and they shake it off. I didn't know that, and that's what dad was doing. I went, wow, good dad. I mean, how do boys learn this stuff? And mom turned that into a sexualized situation. I'm going, wow, I never even thought about that. The final comment is this. Here's what we see with kids who have been alienated. Increased anger, heightened feelings of neglect, patterns of destructive behaviors, a skewed view of reality. These are the kids. More combative. They see things as very black and white, and they generally lack empathy. That's what happens to these kids. that we put in these situations with parents who don't really fully understand the impact of their behaviors on their kids. Thank you guys so much. Hope you learned a few things and
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.
got some handouts. Good. Thank you.